Excellent. And we are live with CEO Unboxed podcast that we do bi-weekly, sharing unfiltered and raw stories of CEOs and leaders behind the company headlines. And I'm your host, Vlada Lotkina, CEO, founder, and mentor. And today we are unboxing a story of Aaron White. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Vlad. Nice to be here today.
And quick overview and what I gathered about Aaron, and you'll certainly hear much more about the journey, is to the question about the stories that we are going to unbox and talk about raw and unfiltered. Aaron's answer was, boy, I have stories to share. So you're in for a treat. And separately from that, I just was asking Aaron before getting on the show about how many exits he had, because there are too many to count. And then obviously there are so many amazing stories of perseverance that will inspire and lift off those who need it today in their journey. So I think without further ado, Aaron, I just wanted to start maybe from those various exits that are too many to count, and just talk about kind of what they meant to you at different stages.
Yeah, well, I think I can count them, so I'll try here. But though it's nice to believe they're uncountable. So the two, there were two that happened very early in my career. So I'm 42 now, and back in the 2008 to 10 timeframe, I wrote a little bit of JavaScript code that helped people find errors, and sold that to a company called Crashlytics, which later got acquired by Twitter. That was a very small exit, but when you're still in your 20s, anything even in the tens of thousands of dollars, which is about where that was like a meaningful sale. I sold technology, and that was like, oh, you can not just make things for fun and not just have customers, but there's value in what you've built. But that was so small that it didn't change my life, but it did embolden me, which I guess also changed my life. And then I started two companies at about the same time. One of them was in EdTech. That's a company called Boundless, and we were trying to make textbooks free for college students. And that was a really interesting company, and we sold it technically, but it was not a good outcome for anybody involved, whether it was Common or investors. It was sort of dollars in, dollars out scale. But in the 11th hour, it could have changed my life again in my early 20s. We can come back to that. No deal is done till it's done. That's a lesson I've learned too many times. And the other company I helped start around that same time frame was a company called Price Intelligently, which later rebranded to ProfitWell. And that one was totally bootstrapped. And a buddy of mine would get together on the weekends. We would hack. We would build something in 2 days. We would try to sell it or launch it on Monday. If it got traction, we'd invest more in it. And that was one where we were building software, we were selling software, but we had no idea how to price software. What do you charge for software? I mean, it's ephemeral. And so there we did a bunch of research into techniques and surveys and data analysis, and came up with this vision for this company. We then sold it. We pulled in another couple of amazing partners who, in fairness, so much credit, if not all credit, should go to them. Patrick Campbell was the CEO of that company. Mm-hmm. And he took that, from us in the early days and, scaled it into a $200 million exit to Paddle at the beginning of 2020. And that company was entirely bootstrapped. So in contrast to barely returning dollars, this was one where, we took something that had about $50,000 of investment from that tiny little sale I made, and a lot of, smarts and market timing and grit and marketing oomph from Patrick and his team, and scaled that into something really life-changing for a large number of people, which was amazing. And then I spent a couple of years in venture capital, which is really interesting to be on that side. Also very painful. It's not the same as building. And then ultimately started another company called Blissfully. I like these B companies for some reason. And that was one where we knew that people were buying tons of SaaS software. They were losing track of what they had, and it was making a mess of their IT systems. That we started building in 2016, really got serious about it in 2017, fundraised, and then ultimately, built a multi-million-dollar ARR business and then sold to a company called Vendor, also at the beginning of 2022, where my team and I came on. I became the CTO. We grew the product development and design organization up quite considerably, and that technology became the underpinning of their software stack. So 2022 was quite the year for me. That was like a lot of both gratification of like hard work well done, and then also the beginning of a really interesting and challenging and educational 2-year period, being part of a hyperscaling company, which it makes you learn a lot fast, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And then the end of last year, I decided to go back to my entrepreneurial roots and start building again, and this time in AI. And if we dip over there, I can talk about that for a long time. It's a very exciting time to be building again.
Are you?
But all those.
Are you sleeping now after seeing all what Sora can do, or still sleepless?
No. I've always been terrible at sleep, but seeing how fast we're advancing. Did you see the Gemini announcements that just came out as well? It's clear we're still on this sort of exponential upswing, and it's going to have huge implications. So no, I'm not sleeping well, but I have never been a good sleeper, so it's unfair to blame it entirely on AI.
Wonderful. Well, that's a new kind of business, right? To sleeping pills to persevere against AI. But thank you so much for a summary, and certainly so much to unpack. So many opportunities to compare and contrast, right? So if we go back to those first experiences, I'm really, first of all, curious in terms of focus, right? The textbook tells you it's all about focus. You cannot be doing 2 different businesses at the same time. You have to be all in. You have to do it. So how did you think about it back then? And was it turned out that you sort of diversified risk, and one of them turned out great and the other not so much? But how did you think about sort of starting 2 companies at once, and why these ones?
Yeah, the why is easy. One, Price Intelligently was born from a very real problem we were having that others also had. And, if I could turn back time, I mean, it turned out great. And again, that team was incredible. Finding something that others actually have a real problem and will pay for is, that's hard. But when you have it, it's magic. And if you do a good job of execution, you can create success, whatever your scale of success definition is. The other company, the ed tech company, was more of this ambition to just radically transform education and do good in the world, which is awesome. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But what we found out early on, unfortunately, was that education is just really hard, because you've got to align so many different parties. I'm like preaching to the choir. You have to align so many different parties here. And for the textbook opportunity, it was one of those where we knew it was better than textbooks. You've got the internet. Like, how could the internet not be better than learning from textbooks? But the problem is the school has an angle. The teachers have their momentum. Publishers have a very strong grip on the higher ed system. And students will kind of do whatever's safest, even if it's expensive, because loans were cheap back then. And so that kind of created this weird place where the opportunity, we were trying to make something happen the market didn't really want to happen. And so, like, you can't fight a bad market is advice I'm sure has been shared before, that others have heard over and over. But, that was a case of it. So going back, I don't think splitting the difference and trying to create a portfolio is necessarily the best move. I think focus is a better move. That said, it turned out, to work in my favor. But, if I could do it again, I don't think I would have tried to navigate a couple things at the same time.
And so you've highlighted obviously how great the team was, and there is certainly that's a critical ingredient of success, right? Startups are so damn hard, especially those early days, and every player has to be an A player and sort of play well with the rest of the team. But do you think that the market timing played the key role in the success, or was it some unique insight that you guys had?
I think it was a combination of things. I think it's team more than anything. I think if you don't have a good team, it doesn't matter what you're doing.
Right. Don't go to work.
No. Yeah. Just to find a different team, honestly. But, if you have a good team, you're still not guaranteed success, obviously. Market timing matters. But I think market appetite matters more than anything, because once you get some traction, yeah, you could work yourself to a local maximum and get stuck. But if you have no traction, you're not going to go anywhere. So even some success, even in a market that may not be big enough, is usually enough for you to layer on top of. And that's exactly what we did. The first version of the business was selling survey software to people to conduct pricing surveys and analyses themselves. We then found that was too complicated, but we were making money and we were making contacts and we were getting feedback. When you're getting feedback, you can adapt. And so with that feedback, we're like, oh, this needs to be more of a service model, like a consultancy service type offering. Then we invested in that and built it. And then we came up with, oh, and you know what? Not only are they having problems with this, they're having problems tracking their metrics. That gave rise to a software opportunity. And then we grew the software opportunity. And, all along the way, Patrick is doing incredible marketing. The engineering and product team are making incredible products. And that put us in this perfect position. We're at the height of, SaaS now. That was a great place to be. So, but it didn't look like that in 2010, for instance. So I think like team above all else, and then some ability to interact with the market, even if the market's not necessarily your final market or the best market.
Yeah. And it sounds, Aaron, that you did, as you defined sort of the steps you went through, and I don't know how much thought was there saying, hey, we pivot into this idea, that idea, but it was certainly an evolution, right? But at any point in time, sounds like as a bootstrap company, you were focused on making money first and learning, right, as you went. Were there some specific decisions about, hey, now we have to discontinue a branch, even though it's still making us money, but it's dragging our time, and sort of, because I find that to be, when there is such an evolutionary growth story, it's really hard to cut off those branches, and sort of then you end up with this sort of a ugly looking tree. So
I definitely made those mistakes many times, and I'm happy to talk about that. In the case of Price Intelligently, I don't know that there's micro pruning, but the macro was about the same. It was this first software product, which we did prune. It was too early. It was not enough for people to do on their own. The consultancy was very valuable, and that took the team did a lot of work to make sure that was effective for customers. And then the software product and its evolution. So, I don't think there was that much pruning there. I've definitely, blissfully, I can beat myself up left and right over how many things we glommed into the product that actually made growth harder. Like, you think you're going to open up new customer opportunities, but really you're actually just creating drag and debt. So if you want to talk about that, that is a place where I made that mistake over and over and over. And hopefully, have learned that deeply for the next couple opportunities.
And how would so if we turn the clock back and sort of you're in that spot, how would you know or evaluate whether it's time to sort of not to overinvest and go wider?
Saying no is one of the hardest things to do, I think, especially when you're an optimist, and if you're a builder, you can make something work does not mean you should make it work, right? So the Blissfully example, it was, we're going to figure out all your SaaS products automatically. And then we can help you save money on them, or we can help you with securing them, or we can help you with compliance, or we can help you with employee onboarding or employee offboarding. There's like 20 different directions it could go. And we made the mistake of doing almost all of them because we were thinking there's this mental model of how they all come together. The problem with that was trying to sell a new customer. You're picking from, a potpourri box of different things your software might do. And then when you're trying to grow customers, you're actually kind of caught because, no two customers are using the same things. So how do you know where to invest and grow? I think the solution is, if you have clarity on what your strategic North Star is, and you've got real clarity on what it is you're selling, and you make sure that those two things point at each other, the product should back this up, and you adapt from there. And that was the thing we didn't get to until a little bit later. At some point we did have strategic clarity, but at that point it was much harder with all of the different customers, using different pieces. And then when, vendor purchased us for a subset of what we built, not all of it, right? They wanted, the team, and they wanted parts of what we had built. That was our opportunity, like, thank God, to fix our original sin of overbuilding. We could say, okay, as painful as this is, customers, now we've got the breathing room to chop this stuff off and refocus for the future. So, saying no is hard. I think that original sin framing is one that I ask a lot of entrepreneurs. Like, I think every business has their original sin,
Yes.
and it's usually
Because
the
there are
thing you kind of,
skeletons. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And somewhere in your head, you know what your problem is, but it's
Right.
too big to address almost. So, like, blissfully, we overbuilt, and it was too big to chop off old customers because we kind of needed the revenue for traction to attract more funding, to attract more customers. So we couldn't unwind it. It's those kind of things that will get you in the end. And so I think being really aware will help you do the hard work of saying, okay, stop this stuff, double down on this stuff. The more you can focus, the better. Easier said than done. It's not an easy conversation to have with yourself.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, well, now there is so much great information about product market fit and how, just because you're doing $1 million in revenue or, some bigger number doesn't mean you have product market fit, because you might be serving five different customer groups for five different use cases, and then you don't
Yeah.
have any market fit,
Yeah.
right? You might have $10,000 as a, as the best combo of those different factors. And
Yeah. And one way to look at entrepreneurship for me is what you're trying to do is to tell a real compelling story that helps people identify a hole that they can solve. Now, maybe they already know the problem. That's way better, right? When you don't have to educate the market. And when you have that kind of clear narrative and your product can deliver on it, that can take you much further on its own than most people realize. Like, again, back to like beating myself up about what we did wrong, which is a good way to learn. We probably could have kept beating the drum of the simpler product for much, much longer. And instead of saying, oh, big customer needed one other feature we didn't have, let's build it. You say, you know what? We'll come back to you. We're going to keep finding customers that already fit what we have and keep going, right? So your metaphor can probably take you further than you think. It's just a question of, are you finding the right fit customers? So the more clarified your vision, your product, and your ideal customer look like, the easier that gets. But again, it's so tempting to stray from that. Like, it's really hard.
it's really hard, especially, every startup, especially in this climate, right, is trying to be really scrappy, is trying to squeeze and maximize their profitability or their unit economics. And then when those customers come knocking on the door, you have to be really disciplined and really bold to say, no, thank you.
Yeah. And if you've got a sales team, it
Right.
only gets much harder to say, hey, please say no to these things. Like,
Mhm.
their commissions are on the line, their performance, their self-esteem. Like, it is tough to say no. And so the more clarity you can provide upfront in your marketing, through your product, through your employees, the more aligned everybody gets, you can do better. But yeah, it's hard. It's very hard.
It's hard. And I'm curious about sort of the exit value or positioning for exit. So you talked about how only parts of the business were really what drove that outcome right at the end. Did you guys have a hypothesis internally that turned out to be true about which parts were the kind of strategic value? You knew what
Yeah.
they were.
Yes. Yeah, I think so. It was, it's interesting because I think for any given, acquisition, you really should be looking for a 1+1 = 3 scenario. There are large enough businesses that acquire also very large and meaningful mature businesses that are just looking for a new piece of P&L with some vague understanding of how, you'll get some efficiencies elsewhere in the
Right.
business. But a really great purchase is, especially if you're a small startup, you're not going to get the valuation you're hoping for off your revenue until you get much larger. So what you're looking for is sort of like, does this strategically unlock something for the acquirer? Does this close a gap in the marketplace that allows them to really leverage their strengths on maybe sales and marketing that they didn't have in product? Or does this collapse multiple years out of their timeline to get things done, which, when you look at the time value of money in fast growing startups, is meaningful. Like, if you can paint a 1+1 = 3 picture for part of what you're doing, like, focus on that almost to the exclusion of all else. And if you can't, it may not be a good acquisition. Like, it just may not be one. And then maybe there'll be many suitors, and maybe you'll get lucky, with a bidding war or a fit or God knows what. But really be looking for that. What does this unlock that's meaningfully interesting?
Yeah. And I think that's another important filter, depending on sort of your end game with the company, right? Thinking about product market fit, of course, is critical to build a business, but there is a kind of a strategic fit when you look at the broader landscape and say, where am I creating that enterprise value? And that's also an important part of that decision of which branches to chop off and when and how fast.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah. And
another very
there's so many.
challenging thing to do.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. The
um,
most challenging thing to do is pruning, I think.
yes, absolutely. And Erin, I do want to go back to some of these stories. So one of them you shared was building a company under the conference table. If I if I
Yeah.
got that right. So tell me more about that story.
Yeah,
How
we're
it
going
happened?
right to the most challenging period of my life and my wife's life by a mile. So when we were building Blissfully, we had raised a conservative number of dollars. I think maybe 7-ish million total in, which maybe is conservative to some and not to others. But we were building a lot, and we had a sizable team and not a lot of money to work with. And our appetite was so much bigger than what we could afford, which is another lesson learned many times. When we were getting towards the acquisition for the company, prior to that, we were going out trying to raise another round of funding. And we had good but not great metrics, and like you kind of need great. Like I think that's the hard part for people to understand, is that you might be very proud of the work you and your team have done, but good doesn't cut it, unfortunately. It's got to be great. So you've either self-sustainable and bootstrapped, or you got to be superlative. And there's no way around that. We weren't superlative, if I'm being honest with myself. And, we had entered into a weird spot where we need to be very careful with managing our customers and our money. And then the pandemic hits, right? And this was just catastrophic for so many companies. For me, I was living in New York, in Manhattan. My wife and I, or then she was my girlfriend, but we had a 1 bedroom, in kind of the Flatiron area. It was not cheap. I really couldn't afford it on my startup, salary. But with the two of us making income, we could kind of afford it. And we're playing the long game, so it's fine. But the pandemic hits, and then she gets sick. And interestingly, not from the pandemic. She had these heart attack-like events that left her having multiple seizures a day, where they would not stop until she passed out because her lungs wouldn't let her breathe. And I can't describe the horror of this. Like, I'd be carrying her to the bathroom in the middle of the night. She ended up in a wheelchair. She ended up on a couch for like 6 months, then a wheelchair for 8 months. She had to relearn how to walk. Terrible. Like, I don't, these sort of events are random. You can't control them. Healthcare in the United States has got its own challenges. We treat symptoms. Nobody was root causing this. It was very complicated. And ultimately, I ended up bleeding out all of my savings to try to provide us stability, to just keep living the lifestyle we were living, so she could focus on recovering. And I didn't want to burden her. Mm-hmm. Well, in the end, between that, the pandemic, and the struggles in the business, I couldn't afford to keep us in New York anymore. So she moved back in with her family in Massachusetts for a while, and I moved into our office. And I was deeply depressed. I mean, my partner is suffering. I'm a 40-year-old man, or just about to be, who felt broke. Now, you've got equity, but like, who the hell knows what happens with that? I had, some crypto, but I kind of mentally just forgot about it. I felt like I'm going to be a 40-year-old failure who like couldn't provide for his partner in her time of need fully, who doesn't have anything to show for all his hard work. And I kind of just secretly moved into our office. I lived on an air mattress underneath the conference room table. I had mice parkouring off me in the middle of the evening. I would shower when there was a shower in the building of like dirty, cold muck water. So I would take mucky ice showers every now and then, until I, kind of fixed my finances enough to get a gym membership to go shower there. It was deeply depressing. I can't describe how deep in the hole I was from all this, but I didn't, if you asked me at the time, friends, family, I'm like, I'm fine. This is fine. It's entrepreneurship, whatever. It wasn't fine. And it took, it took about a year of living in that situation for me to then, move back in, with my partner, with her family, which felt like swallowing my pride. It felt like failing. It wasn't, but in my head, it felt like that because I'm supposed to be smart. I'm supposed to be successful. I punished myself, I think. And then, lo and behold, months later, she and I are engaged, and then suddenly both of those businesses are selling. Or actually married. Skip the engagement period here. I was like, this is plenty of time has passed. And life was great, and I was able to move us to Renown, Florida, so that she could do the thing that would heal her, which was walking. Walking was the big thing that impacted her health. And so, while did we lose video here? Sorry about that. While she was, in the sunshine here, she was able to keep her health up, and now she's doing, incredible. There we go. Am I back yet or no?
I think you're back, Aaron.
Okay. All right. Apologies. Yeah.
No.
Right during the emotional time of the story.
But. I know. Well, this is incredible, and certainly I truly appreciate you sharing such a vulnerable and raw story, because at the end of the day, all entrepreneurs have stories, small or large, right? But just being so open and so vulnerable and being an example of someone who persevered and sold not one but two companies, it is certainly a great inspiration. And Aaron, you mentioned something saying that others were asking you if you're fine, and you said you're fine, going through the toughest stuff. What kept you going, or did you actually find that belief that it's going to work out for the best, or what held you together through that devastating time?
Yeah, I can only share that an unhealthy ability to keep going with lack of sleep, lack of concrete optimism. I just had an unhealthy ability to persevere, which maybe in the end was good. But again, I think the thing here is that I know on some level you and I wouldn't be talking at all if I hadn't had successful outcomes. However, for every one person that manages to thread that needle, the failure rate is so high for all of us in entrepreneurship, which means there are people who are struggling like that are going to keep struggling, and it doesn't go anywhere good. So it's hard to say it's necessarily a good quality. I think there's healthier ways to navigate it, which I learned towards the tail end of it. What ended up kind of dislodging this thinking for me was a couple of things. One, I had a friend who works at a meditation startup he created, telling me that I was an anxious individual, and it was really helpful to have someone external that you trust tell you these things. But it was also, I was asking myself, what if my brother told me he moved into his office and gave up his apartment, and his girlfriend, moved away and was struggling? Like, what would I say to him? I wouldn't let him do that. I would think there's something really wrong. He was suffering deeply. And once I did that perspective shift, it was like, oh, clearly this is unhealthy. Clearly I'm doing the wrong thing. So that was the thing that helped dislodge me from it. And I found that, yeah, startups are hard, but you can get help from others on so many different dimensions, and trying to preserve your sense of self and ego is not a valid thing to be doing. It's counterproductive. How much better would everything have been for my relationship, my business, if I had just admitted that, like, I'm suffering, I feel like a failure, I don't know how this could turn out. Please help me. And I know that, I've got so many friends and such a loving family and such a loving wife. We would have found a way to do something. But I was so stuck in this need to self-navigate
it yourself.
Yeah.
To solve it.
Yeah.
And that's such a critical lesson, right? And I think a lot of us, we feel that we need to be in charge, we need to be leaders, we set out on this challenging path, and now it's all sort of the bus stops with us to solve it. And I think that's what makes it hard for so many folks to really ask for help, right? And as a not a sign of weakness, but perhaps as a sign of strength, right? And understanding what you need to
Yeah.
actually move from there. Are there sort of other lessons or other ways that life sort of after that year is completely changed for you?
Yeah, I mean, well, number one, being being in a relationship where we've gone through some very challenging things, both individually and together. I feel like I've never had such a great rock solid foundation with my partner. So, so much credit to her for helping me build that. Honestly, that's super helpful. I think I've since then rededicated myself to personal health investment, which it's a weird thing to say. I mean, I've climbed Kilimanjaro, I've run marathons, I've done, kind of deadlifting at, interesting weights. But at some point I just sacrificed the candle at both ends for business. And now that's a non-negotiable for me. Like, you wake up in the morning, invest in your health, and then start your day. And if you can't do that, you're not just hurting yourself, you're also hurting your team, right? If I show up,
Mhm.
snappy because I didn't sleep well, because I'm not, eating well and taking care of myself, that's unfair to everybody. So that's changed quite a bit. Um, there's a lot of lessons I've learned beyond that, but I think, asking for help in a broader sense, being more vulnerable, and then investing in your, the things that aren't your business, but are you. Sounds obvious. And so many people have shared these lessons, but it's, sometimes you got to learn things the hard way. And I definitely learned the hard way.
Thank you, Aaron. These are truly foundational lessons, right? And I think that's what those personal trials help us realize, right? Is that you have to invest in the foundation, which is you, and of course your relationships. And um, just switching gears a bit, you strike me as someone who holds a number of strong beliefs. So, a question for you is this. uh, what do you think are some of your beliefs or a belief that many people would disagree with?
That many would disagree with. I can definitely find people that disagree with just about anything I believe. Uh, let's see. Um, I think that here are just a smattering, maybe in no particular order. On a business building level, I think that I tried to make myself famous for saying this, but I think culture is a knife fight. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to create a great company culture, it's not what you say, it's what you do, and it's what you hold people accountable to. And in order to hold people accountable to the things you believe that they might also believe, but it's hard, you have to get in there and give people very specific feedback that might be uncomfortable or received as attacking or hurtful, even if you do your best to frame it in the most constructive way. So culture is a knife fight. It means you need to get up close. It's personal, and you're going to get hurt. And I think a leader who does not get into the weeds so that they can show people what they're capable of, or how to perform, in a better or different way that makes the company greater still. If you're not willing to do that, you're not a real leader. So I don't know if that's one that, I know some people disagree with that. I think a lot of people say, oh, it's micromanagerial, or give people independence and autonomy. And I believe in giving people, independence and autonomy. But I also believe that if you're not giving very specific feedback and getting hurt because of it, you're probably not in it enough. So that's one.
Awesome.
Um, I think I got a lot of thoughts on hiring and a lot of thoughts on performance management, kind of commiserate with that. I'm not proud of it, but I do think that, if culture is the way you do things, it's also clearly very tied into the people you hire. So back to the conversation about pruning, you really need to be clear eyed about, was this person the right hire or not? And if they're not, part ways with people very quickly. And I think it's not great when you hire somebody and then right away you find out it's the wrong person. Obviously, that's terrible for you and for them,
Mhm.
probably more so for them. But it's better to just acknowledge it as fast as you can. So I have definitely hired and let go of people within 4 days, 2 weeks of, onboarding, literally after the start date, going, oh, this is not what we all agreed upon. This is just not going to work, and pulling the cord. That's part of the knife fight. It's hard to tell people this isn't a fit, like, and I think one thing it's really hard for entrepreneurs, you're trying to be an optimist, you have to be. I think this business could change the world, do big things, attract talent, attract capital, attract customers. But you also have to be deeply, realistic. And these conversations are some of the least fun anybody will ever have, but you have to do them. It's the only thing fair to, to you, to your team, and to the person in question. So that's one that I've seen a lot of people will, hire and be proud of, the team they're constructing. But if I look at the data and they've never pruned it, like, what are the odds you're that lucky that you've always hired the best of the best? Pretty low. And then the last set of beliefs that I know people won't agree with me on all have to do with AI, which, no surprise, I'm going in an AI company. But, I think this is probably the biggest technological wave we've had since the network was invented itself. And I would actually place it larger than the web, larger than mobile, all of which, of course, are foundational to get us here. But this is just immensely large. It's going to reshape so much in such huge ways that I think people aren't thinking clearly because it's too scary to imagine what's coming, which I don't even feel comfortable with, even, putting on my thinking cap and trying to, prognosticate about the future. I shy away from certain outcomes because it's too challenging to grapple with. And yet if I think it through kind of, step by step, I'm forced into some of these conclusions personally.
Wonderful, Aaron. And I certainly want to spend our last bit of time on topics of AI and what specifically excites you. I think when I'm a big on AI as a user, I certainly creating content, just editing all sorts of things, research. I just love it, and it certainly made me 100 times more productive. But as I look at the space, I think as entrepreneur, there's so much opportunity, but at the same time, there are thousands of companies in AI that are born each day, right? Like a gold rush. I think I might have lost Aaron, and I'm waiting for him to rejoin.
Oh, no. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Aaron?
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah.
No worries. AI didn't want the world to know about what it is you have to say. So
Yeah,
they would
it's
mark
it's
it with the video.
yeah. So, I want to make sure your recording here works out,
Yes,
because
I
I
am
think we've actually
recording.
lost, I think my
Yeah,
chat
I
may have
think there
lost
is no
the chat.
video, but I'm recording the
Okay, great. Yeah, so I apologize for the snafu there. If you don't mind repeating the question one more time, so I
Yes, of
can.
course. So I wanted to talk about AI, and I think as a user of AI, I absolutely love it. I love the opportunity and how it advances the content creation, the creativity, the productivity, and about everything there is to advance about. As a user and someone starting businesses, creating businesses, but as entrepreneur, I think it's so hard to navigate this space, right? That's just birthing thousands of new companies in AI a day, pretty much at this point. So, how do
Yeah.
you think about it?
So here I'm trying to take a first principles approach to things, and I'll even lay out some of them. If I look at AI, what makes it so fascinating? I think there's a couple of different pieces. One is that AI implements what I'm calling the people protocol, right? So, like, what's so magical about the first time you talk to ChatGPT? It's that it can understand your human speech and it can write back to you. So it can read like a human and write like a human. And somewhere in the middle, it reasons like a human. Not perfectly, but it's getting better, and we can talk about that. So it can read and write like a human. And if you see like what 11 Labs is doing and Whisper and these kind of audio models, it can speak like a human and it can hear like a human better than any other text to speech or speech to text that we've ever had. And then you see things like, Dolly, Midjourney, and now Sora. It can draw like it can conceptualize and draw or render video like we can. And they also can understand imagery that you upload to them. So all the ways that people interact with each other, AI now does. It implements the people protocol. Mind blowing, right? So that's one big thing. And I think the thing for me is where you should be thinking about applying AI is not at the GUI center of some SaaS product. It's where do people live and do work? Because the metaphor is very much it's like a person. So I did this video on, apps are people too. I believe it. I think the right framing for what's coming, not necessarily where we are, but what's coming is that AI can be essentially a sidecar person to you or your organization. The second thing that really fascinates me about AI is the speed at which it's getting better. The rate at which these tools are getting better, the context window is expanding, the reasoning capabilities improving, techniques improving for memory management or tool usage. It's just we're clearly on the upswing. And so when you take that and play it forward, how long before we have, what people will loosely call AGI, artificial general intelligence, where AI is a fungible substitute for human intelligence in some domains, followed by more domains, and maybe eventually all domains, right? That is a titanic shift in how things get done or get built. And so when you combine those two realizations up and play it forward, to me, the magic is in playing, those combinations of those two things together and starting from, if you were building a company in a world where AI is just sitting there ready to be hired, how does that change everything? And I don't think it looks very much like the world we're in now. I actually think it's radically different. Now that's going to take, years to decades to fully, flow through, but maybe not. I mean, the other thing that is amazing about AI is this is a pure software innovation. Yes, you need special hardware for it, but you see how fast websites can get adopted and how fast ChatGPT got to, their user base or their revenue base. Software moves very fast, and so we could see a lot of change very rapidly. So that's the stuff that's fascinating to me, is not injecting AI into existing things, but rethinking things entirely from these new premises.
Understood. And so thinking from the perspective of AI as an actual player, right? As someone that you can hire or someone you can partner with or someone you can interact with as a human. Is that
Yeah.
sort of the
Yep, that's
essence?
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And now I have how many different AI systems sitting, side by side performing co-pilot to me. But when I'm working on an investor memo, I will discuss it with these these LLMs. What do you think about this piece? Find me holes in this. What competitive weakness do I have here? And use that as a sparring partner to go back and forth, or to help me write emails, or to help me draft blog posts. I mean, the list of things that you do are near infinite, which means the list of things that AI can help with or just outright do are also near infinite. So it's very powerful. And I think we, even those of us who are trying to stay on top of what's going on with AI, the behavioral change to start AI first is still so difficult. My wife told me about Perplexity. I don't know, let's call it like 8 months ago, maybe more. She's, the day it came out, she's like, this is amazing. It's so much better than Google. You should use it. I'm like, yeah. I'm playing with ChatGPT, I'm learning the APIs and building these other things. And eventually I started switching over my habit to, first I talk to AI, whether it's Perplexity or ChatGPT. When I'm trying to learn something new, I start there to build a conceptual framing, then go to the web. That's a huge shift. It took me a while to do it because I'm an old man who's got a lot of habits. But you can imagine there's a lot of young entrepreneurs out there that are breathing this in far more sophisticated ways than I can even hope to.
Right. And a whole generation that now starts their journey with technology, with AI first.
Yeah.
And if you were just sort of starting out today and building a business, sounds like your belief is that AI is the place to be, and it's the biggest tectonic shift that's happening. Would you suggest that that's the opportunity, or what kind of lens other folks should be thinking about AI to be more protected?
That's a good question. I mean, in the end, what you're trying to do is find a problem in the market that you can solve to make someone's life better. whether that uses AI or horses or, crayons, it doesn't really matter. That's you have to start there and work backwards. So my advice is find a customer problem that, you can become very familiar with, or you are already very, very familiar with, and tackle that. AI be damned. That said, I do think that if you are building a business today and you are not thinking through what does it mean when there's plausible human intelligence on tap, ready to go, and you don't incorporate that into your strategy, I feel like you're building for the wrong decade. I feel like that's a thing that would have worked 10 years ago, but is going to be increasingly unlikely to work go forward. So, where I think AI is sort of where it's at, it's more about, there are definitely real opportunities there, but always start with your customer problem with this asterisk of be very mindful of what happens if AI reaches that, because I do believe in the next 2 to 5 years we're going to see it.
Right. And I think in other words, Aaron, just to summarize it, is as you see the customer problem today, think about what that problem or how that problem relates to the broader context of what AI and how AI will change our lives and work lives and personal lives, right, in the next 5 years, pretty much. We're not even talking decades at this point.
No, I know, and that's the other scary thing is that's such an immense amount of change to be predicting on a relatively short time frame. Yeah,
Amazing.
but it does mean there's a lot of fun stuff that's going to get built, and there's a lot of opportunities that seemed closed out that are now open. A lot of these big companies that aren't going to fully navigate this, and that's every tech generation produces massive new winners, and people that seemed unassailable falter. So there's a lot up for grabs.
Amazing. Well, that's a wrap. Lots of optimism about the future. Don't forget to ask for help when you get stuck or
Please.
going navigating through the challenging waters. Thank you, Aaron, for sharing your story. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
Vlada, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.